Our next speaker has arrived. May I introduce to you all the way from Greenville, escorted by his chauffeur, I'm guessing she did the driving, Mr. Stephen Edward Buckingham, also known as Buck to his friends. Come on up, Stephen.
Hey, thank you
Glad to have you.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for having me this morning. As Bill said, I've brought my co-counsel. She is a little fussy this morning, but thank you for trying to take care of her. I really do appreciate that. There's also snacks in her bag. You know, when Bill asked me to come down here to speak, of course I said I would. I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea where it was going to be, how many folks would be here. It is really great to see such a tremendous turnout on a beautiful Saturday morning. My wife asked me last night, she was like, who are you going to speak with again? And I said, well, it's the Greenwood County Democratic Party. And she's like, what is this, like 5 folks at a Waffle House? And I said, this isn't a Mike Pence campaign rally. Like, I expect there's going to be more there. So it's like 50 times more than that. So I'm glad that we are outperforming his now defunct campaign. And like I said, it is so good to see all of you. So you all probably don't know anything about me. Let me just tell you briefly about myself. I'm a lawyer. I practice in Greenville. I'm a sole practitioner. I've been a sole practitioner for going on 9 years now. Primarily what I do is, well, frankly, business divorces. And by that, what I mean is business partners that can't be in business together anymore. I help them break up their businesses. So that's the bread and butter of what I do. But I'm not here to talk to you about that this morning. I'm here to talk to you about this other case I've got going on. Maybe you've heard about it. It involves an attempt by the General Assembly to appropriate $1.5 million to an organization in Greenville called the Christian Learning Centers of Greenville County. And so we brought this lawsuit a little bit over a year ago now. And so you may be wondering, how does a guy who does business law, business litigation for a living end up doing stuff like that? Well, do I have any lawyers out here? No? Good. That's probably for the best. So the law is a very odd profession, and the things that you find yourself doing can be very strange, particularly because of the way that life just puts you on a course. So coming out of law school, my first job was working as a law clerk to a federal judge in Virginia. And it was great training for a person that knew nothing about practicing law. And so after that year clerkship ended, I moved back down to Greenville, started practicing. And from time to time, it happens where there are cases pending in front of various courts, whether they're state courts or federal courts, where it looks like it's going to go to trial, and to make the judge's life easier at trial, the judge will call you up and ask you to do a favor for him or her and act as a lawyer for a side that's not represented. Like I said, it just makes the trial judge's life so much easier when you have a lawyer in the courtroom who knows what's going on. So a number of years ago, probably 10 years ago now, that happened to me. There was a federal judge who still is sitting in Greenville who appointed me to represent a gentleman who is an inmate in the South Carolina prison system who had a First Amendment freedom of religion claim against the South Carolina Department of Corrections. And that case was going to go to trial. And so I was appointed to represent him, and we ended up trying that case, and we ended up prevailing in that case. And so at that time, it was kind of a strange thing because under the particular law that we had sued under, this particular federal law, almost no one had ever tried a case to a jury to completion in the United States. And so somehow or another, because of that, my name got raised to the attention of the ACLU in South Carolina, who at that time, shortly after trial, was looking at bringing a lawsuit against Greenville County regarding what is functionally the disenfranchisement of college students in Greenville County. At that time, this is back in the 2016 election, Greenville County would not register out-of-state students to vote in Greenville County, out-of-state college students, really even out-of-county college students, even though they were residents of Greenville County living in dorms and whatnot in Greenville County. So we had to bring a lawsuit against them in order to force them to register Greenville County students, college students, to vote, and we prevailed in that. So I go back to my quiet practice. Well, it's not a quiet practice, but I go back to my regular practice of breaking business owners up. And about a year ago, I get a call from the folks at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, a not-for-profit that's based, I believe it's out of Wisconsin. And they said that they've got this lawsuit pending here, or they were thinking about filing a lawsuit in Greenville County because in the last budgetary cycle, there had been a legislative appropriation made through earmarks of this $1.5 million for the Christian Learning Centers of Greenville County. And because I don't pay attention to that world, I had no idea what they were talking about. Maybe there had been, I don't know, maybe an article in the local papers about it, maybe. But for whatever reason, the local newspapers and local television stations don't do a great job of covering local news, so I really had no idea. So they told me what was going on, and the situation was that this entity, the Christian Learning Centers, currently runs. It's not an after-school program. It's kind of like a program that is timed release from schools in Greenville County. So you, as a student or as a parent, can allow your student to leave the Greenville County Schools premises and go to this adjunct facility where there is an hour or two of dedicated biblical instruction, which is fine. That's consistent with the Constitution. That's fine. But the problem was that a couple of legislators, state house members, had made a request for an earmark to the governor's office for this $1.5 million for seed money for Christian learning centers to acquire property and to build a physical facility and to have a school where the point of the school was to provide biblical instruction. And in fact, the long-term plan of this is that it would be a residential school, like students would live there. And so, as I got to looking at this and ultimately decided to jump in on it, my attention was immediately brought to two provisions of our state constitution that were particularly relevant. One is a provision that largely mirrors the First Amendment of our federal Constitution that says that the General Assembly may not make any law in respect of religion. But then there's a separate provision of our state constitution that specifically says that the General Assembly may not make any appropriations of funds directly to a private or religious educational establishment. And here we've got Christian learning centers, which is both, right? I mean, first of all, on the religious component, it's right there in the name, Christian learning centers. You go to their website, and they're not ashamed about this, and I'm not saying that they should be. I think in general, they are as an important part of our societal fabric as anyone else. But you can't use taxpayer money to advance your agenda, all right? And you go to their website and you look at it, and it's very unashamed in saying that their mission is to, quote, elect Jesus, all right? That it is to provide biblical instruction, and it is clearly biblical instruction from a certain evangelical perspective, which is fine. Just don't use taxpayer money. Now, that's on the religious side. But we have this other piece of the state constitution that says that the General Assembly can't make appropriations to private educational institutions. And that's what this is. All right? You can go to, it's not the IRS website, but there's some sort of auxiliary website where you can look up the tax filings for not-for-profit corporations for pretty much any not-for-profit in America. And you go there and you see that Christian Learning Centers has filed as a not-for-profit corporation under the tax laws for, at this point, decades. And there's no question that they are a private educational institution. So we felt like we had them going and coming. The thing about the law is that it's also very frustrating, particularly as you get into legal fights, and oftentimes for reasons that you don't anticipate. So, in September of 2022, we filed this lawsuit on behalf of 4 citizen taxpayers of South Carolina against Governor McMaster, the controller, the treasurer, and the superintendent of education, first of all, to declare that this appropriation was unlawful under the plain, unambiguous, express terms of our state constitution, and second, to stop this appropriation of money from happening. All right, because there's 2 steps to it. First of all, you've got to get approved for the money, and second, you've actually got to get it. So they'd already been approved, and we had to intervene to stop them from actually getting it. So, we didn't sue Christian Learning Centers because they hadn't received the money, and they didn't do anything wrong. They were just asking for the money. It was our elected officials that should have honored their contract with the people of this state and not made the appropriation. But they didn't. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, Henry McMaster, right? That's the governor. We have Curtis Loftus, who's the state treasurer. The controller, he just changed because of a budgetary issue that they had back in the spring. I can't remember his name, but now Ellen Weaver is the superintendent. And in terms of the legislators that requested the earmark, offhand, I don't remember who that was. It's in the lawsuit filing, if you can jog my memory. John McCravey? Okay, and there was another one too from Greenville County. So, so we didn't sue them either because all they did was raise it to the governor's attention. The governor signed off on it, and then it was supposed to be the rest of the chain of command that was going to actually make this funding. So we had to stop that. So we sue them. And when we filed the lawsuit, we also asked the court, this lawsuit was pending down in Richland County, we also asked the court for an emergency hearing to get an order that would make sure that while we're litigating this dispute, the money doesn't get quietly appropriated out from underneath us. I thought that when we requested the emergency hearing, we would get it probably within 2 weeks. That's generally what happens, particularly here in the upstate. We didn't have a hearing on that for, I think it was about 8 months. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 8 weeks. 8 weeks. And so that was frustrating. We could never really get an answer why the clerk's office wouldn't schedule us for a hearing, but whatever. We finally got it, and we got a commitment from all those government officials on the record that while the lawsuit was pending, they weren't going to disperse the money. Great. So, meanwhile, we decide that we want to try to get some information out of Christian Learning Centers. So we send them a subpoena for documents. They give us some. They don't give us a number of others, citing attorney-client privilege or whatever. And so we say, okay, that's fine. Let's take your testimony under oath. Give me a couple of witnesses from Christian Learning Centers. Let's get a court reporter, and let me take your testimony. We tried to set that up on a couple of occasions. Each time we did, and we get a date set, the night before, Christian learning centers would unilaterally postpone the deposition for one reason or another. Who knows? So that's frustrating. But ultimately, it was effective, because on the third time that we were trying to take their testimony, and by that point, we'd already started raising their delays to the attention of the court. On the third time, their board met and decided that they were not going to accept the money. They were going to withdraw their request, which was great. We wanted that. But here's the next frustrating thing that happened. What we wanted, we said, thanks, Christian learning centers, thank you so much for agreeing to do that. Now, government officers, will you agree to honor their request that you will not fund this money? They wouldn't do it. So, and here's kind of the strange thing that procedurally how this developed after that. So then, the governor's office files what's called a motion for summary judgment. That just means in the law that, hey, court, we're entitled to having this case thrown out as a matter of law because, according to their argument, the case was now moot. It was moot because Christian learning centers had said, we're not going to take the money. And our argument was, that's great. Why won't the government commit to honoring that request? Well, I'm here to tell you the order has not been entered yet, but we just argued that motion to a judge in the Midlands a couple of days ago, and it sounds like he is going to dismiss the lawsuit as moot, which is frustrating. But the good news is that because of various commitments we've gotten on the record in front of a black robe from Christian learning centers and the government, if they do try to honor that funding request, we've got options. We've got options to stop it. Now, I'm going to ask a dumb question, but why not? Who cares? What does it matter? Right? What does it matter if a private entity wants to get funding from the state to do a thing, even if the thing is good? Right? I mean, I identify as Christian. We're meeting in a church. There's great stuff that churches do for our communities. So what's the big deal? The big deal is the rule of law. All right? The rule of law, well, there's several aspects to it, but one important aspect is that our officials must honor the contract that the people of this state have made with each other to establish this state. They have to. Thank you. And if they don't, someone's got to call them on the carpet. Now, historically, not just in this state, but in every state, and particularly in the federal government, it has always been a challenge to know how taxpayer money is being spent. And that will continue to be true. It's going to take folks that are diligently watching, particularly in this state, how earmarks are made and what they're used for. Here's one of the crazy things that was articulated during the course of this litigation that I'm in. Christian learning centers initially took the position that we're going to get this $1.5 million for seed money to build a school. We filed the lawsuit. Within about a week after filing the lawsuit, their tune changed. They released a new press statement that said, oh, when we said we were going to build a school, that was actually not what we were going to do. What we were going to use the money for was to partner with a separate charter school learning management organization, and they're going to have a non-sectarian school. Well, that's news to everyone, because if you look at the documents that were submitted to the governor's office to fund this appropriation, it says very plainly, we are going to build a school. And here's how we're going to do it. They submitted plans for the school. They had architectural renderings. The architectural renderings included things like a chapel. In these materials, the chapel was described as the most important piece of this facility that was going to be constructed. So it was kind of comical to me, frankly, that after this lawsuit was filed, then we're told, oh no, that was just media hyperbole. We're not going to build a school. No. Let's just be real here. You were going to build a school, and the only reason why you're not is because we caught your hand in the cookie jar. All right? And it took litigation to get you to pull your hand out of the cookie jar. And unfortunately, as much as I would have loved for the court to have said, no, I think there's still a live issue here that we need to address because the government won't commit to not funding this. As much as I wanted that decision, at least we stopped the appropriation. And that's why it matters, because where does it end? All right? Where does it end? We can start on that slippery slope of considering what would be next after appropriating money for this school. What project would be next where the water just gets a little bit hotter? And then the next one where it's a little bit hotter. And it stacks up on each other over time to where all of a sudden there's no problem. Historically, there's a track record of no problem with the General Assembly giving money directly to the Baptist church, the Episcopalian church, whatever church. And so regrettably, that makes us be vigilant, have to be vigilant, and to hold the line. So, I suspect, of course I can't prove it, I suspect that a large part of the reason why that Christian learning centers did a tactical retreat and withdrew their request for funding is because there's already discussions for the next budgetary cycle. And I wish I could tell you what to watch for, but I can't. Who knows what a requesting entity will be? Who knows how it will get buried in the line items? You know, it's actually very interesting. It seemed to be the governor's office position as this case developed that a party who receives an earmark doesn't necessarily have to use that money in the ways that they told the governor's office they would use the money. That's what was suggested. I agree. I think there's a word for that, and because we're in a house of God, I'm not going to use it. But we all know what it is. And so we have to be vigilant. And this is true no matter what your party affiliation is. Governments change. Parties in power change. But that's why the plain, simple terms of the Constitution and the laws of this state have to be applied evenly so that we can all prosper. You know, the thing that I have to keep on reminding folks is that we're not enemies, right? We're on the same team here. We're trying to build a more perfect union, all right? We have different ideas on the strategies it takes to get there, but our neighbors are not our enemies. And as a consequence, it is important for Democrats, for Republicans, for independents, for Green Party, for whatever party, libertarians, to be united in the idea that we will hold the line on what the law is uniformly and see it through. Now, I have no idea how long I've taken. I am happy to answer any questions that anyone might have, or I'm happy to get off the stage, whatever you'd like. Yeah, of course. The question was, what happens to that money that was appropriated? Okay, here's a fun fact. You might think that because I'm a lawyer, I've got special insight into how the machinery of government works. The answer is, I don't. And the reality is, I'm not sure that even the government knows, okay? And here's why I say that. When we first commenced this lawsuit, or pretty soon thereafter, the 4 government offices we named as defendants each said, you can't sue us, we're not responsible. And it's like, okay, look, one of y'all is. At least one of y'all is. Right? And the governor's office said, well, we're not responsible. All we did was sign the bill into law that made the appropriation. We have no participation in funding from this point forward. You can't sue us. Okay, great. That's why we named the treasurer. Treasurer's office says, well, we don't do that. We don't receive the payment request from the appropriation recipient. You can't sue us. And I said, okay, well, that's nonsense. But we've still got the superintendent of education into whose budget this money was deposited. So we've got her. Well, that office said, well, you can't sue us. It's just in our budget. It doesn't mean we have any role in the participation of issuing the disbursement. Okay, fine. We've got the controller. What does the controller do? They're like, well, we're the ones that you actually send the payment request to, but all we do is pass it on to the treasurer's office. Okay, all right. What y'all have just told me is someone is responsible for it. Y'all can figure it out who's responsible, but one of y'all is. And we got you. So we got past that hurdle. But it seems to be the law. And this is what I argued to the judge 10 days ago on the motions for summary judgment. It seems to be the law in this state that once an appropriation is made and designated, the funds are set aside in the public treasury, and they will not be returned to the general fund unless there is a judicial decree saying that the appropriation is unlawful. And that's exactly why I argued to the judge, hey, this thing isn't moot, right? That's why we need the government to commit they're not going to disperse these funds. For a variety of reasons, there is a significant amount of deference that the judges of this state give to the legislature, and I get that. I do think this lawsuit is not moot, but that's why we have a court of appeals, and perhaps we'll be appealing that. I just don't know what we're going to do yet. But to answer your specific question, it's our understanding that the money will sit segregated indefinitely, even though there's apparently a commitment on the record that Christian learning centers will not take the money. So, and whether or not that's true, I don't know, because like I said, it appears like no one's got any idea how this stuff actually works. Yes, ma'am. So the prior treasurer who lost his job because of a significant accounting error, the question was the amount that we heard publicly close to the amount of the discrepancy? Right? That's the question. So all I can tell you about that is just hearsay of what I've heard of other folks kind of in that space. I think, as I understand it, I think it was maybe more nuanced than just $4 billion was lost. But I do think that it was a significant amount of money to the tune of probably 12 figures. That, from what I've heard, but I don't know that. That didn't come up in the course of this litigation, so that's just me keeping my ear to the ground and trying to figure out whatever it is that Columbia's doing. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so the question was, if the funds were appropriated and segregated into account, wouldn't the funds have to be subject to another vote to take it out of the segregated account to return it to the general fund? I think that's an interesting question. Certainly, I think there is authority to suggest that the General Assembly could do that. The thing that I wonder about, and I don't think this would be litigated, but the thing I wonder about is whether the decision of a prior legislature to appropriate money can be rescinded by a subsequent legislature. And I can see arguments on both sides about why that would or would not be the case. So as the lines fall, I am technically in William Timmons' district. Yeah. It's funny. Sarah Timmons is a dear friend of mine. What a ride she's been on. Once upon a time, and I'll tell you this, I didn't grow up here. Y'all don't know me. I didn't grow up here. I grew up on the other side of the Appalachians in a small town in East Tennessee. And I've been in Greenville now for 20 years. So it's very much home to me. But growing up, I always thought, I'm a political animal. I'm going to run for office. And the older I've gotten, particularly working with the judge that I clerked for, and then being around other folks that have been in public office, both at the state and federal levels, I don't know that that's for me. I love the idea. I love the idea of, maybe I can be there and make a difference. But how many folks have followed that fool's errand and get to Washington or even get to Columbia and you just get beaten down? And so I think at this stage of my life, particularly because of my co-counsel that's sitting over there, I am much more in love with the idea of just being the monster in the countryside that wanders around and every now and then just strikes down something that looks like it's inappropriate and gets to come and talks to folks like you and cheers folks like him on and folks like you on. But to do the best I can in the small slice of the world that God has given me. So the short answer to your question is, I doubt I would run for Congress, but I appreciate that.
Everybody who speaks.
That's fine. It's good to know I'm not special. Do we have time for one more?
One last question.
Yes, sir. Well, that the question was, if that money is dispersed, how would we know? That was one of the arguments I made to the court. And then I got accused of suggesting that the governor and the controller and the treasurer and the superintendent of education would somehow be acting in bad faith, that they would try to conceal their intentions, and I'm a terrible person. Right? And I said, look, Judge, I'm not accusing anyone of being bad, but, the reality is we got to follow the time-honored advice of the CIA here. Trust, but verify. Right? And all I'm asking is an order that will allow us to trust what's going to happen with the money. And short of that, how am I going to verify it? Well, that argument didn't prevail, unfortunately, but your point is well taken. I think the only way that we're going to know, y'all probably won't know down here in this county. It's going to take folks in Greenville County watching this to see whether or not, is there a groundbreaking going on for this Christian learning centers? Theoretically, it would be the job, maybe the obligation of local media to be the folks that are watchdogging our government. But in the upstate, I think we all know that doesn't happen. The best reporting on this lawsuit has come from the state newspaper and the Post and Courier. I'm not even sure that the Greenville News has carried an article about this. If they have, I'm not aware of it. So, vigilance, diligence, that's how we know.
Thank you.
I'm sorry? Hey, thank you, and thank you all. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Just one factual item. The controller that he was referring to, a very forgettable name, a gentleman by the name of Richard Ekstrom. And Richard Ekstrom resigned after a lot of pressure because last year he exaggerated unintentionally, this was just an accounting goof, the state's cash position by $3.5 billion. Overstating the amount the state had sent to colleges and universities. So that was a big whoopsie. You know, a little, forgot the decimal point, forgot the carry the 1, divide by 2, and the accounts were off by $3.5 billion. Thank you, Stephen. He makes a great point about it really does take a village to do this all together. So you have the lawmakers, and let me repeat, this earmark was placed by 2 legislators, one of which was John McCravey from here in Greenwood. He was one of the co-sponsors. Other areas like legal teams who fight the fight, whether it be independent groups or the ACLU, think about them when it comes time for annual charity donations, because they're out there fighting the fight for the lawmakers that deviate from the law. Third, and he brought that point up as well, the media. I heard about this from the state newspaper. I'm a paid subscriber to the state. I read it daily. I read about this. I saw my representative's name listed in that article and went, okay, tell me more. And in it, they said they contacted him, and he's on record with the state newspaper as saying, oh, I didn't read that earmark. He just signed off on it and submitted it. He said, oh, I really didn't know about the constitutionality because I didn't read it. That was what was in the paper. You want a lawmaker out there who's signing off on your tax dollars, not reading what he's signing off on? That's a fireable offense, in my opinion. Yeah, let's try that at work tomorrow. Let's spend some of our company's money and not read what it's being spent on. See how long you last. The last point I want to make, and we'll wrap up our meeting, the issue about public funds going to private education institutions. Yes, that is in the state constitution. But you need to be aware the state legislator is pushing to remove that from the state constitution. There is proposed legislation that removes that limitation on state dollars going to private and religious institutions. It's a constitutional change, so it has to go through a special process. It needs a supermajority in the General Assembly to pass it, but guess what they've got? They got a supermajority. And it takes, I think, just a simple majority of voters. Well, has anybody checked to see what state we're in? So we need to fight this and educate with every tooth and nail, because they want to remove this restriction, because this is one of the challenges for the educational savings accounts, the school vouchers, where they want to take the money from public schools, give it to the private for-profit institutions. They think they've got a workaround the state constitution, but in case they don't, they're ready to submarine the state constitution. They're going to get what they want. The only way to stop them is by electing good legislators who will be thorns in their side and prevent that supermajority. Okay, that's it. We have reached the end of our hour.